Hello there, I'm Jason Ball, and this is a bonus episode of Life After News. Emily Barr was the president of Graham Media Group for 10 years, and before that, she was the general manager at WLS in Chicago for 15 years. She retired 3 years ago, but remains very active in the business. She's on the board of the Associated Press, the Carol Nealon Project, and the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting. She also writes a column for TV News Check. In her latest column, she says local TV news and nonprofit collaborations are the only way forward. Very nice to meet you for the first time. You are a titan of the television station business, and in retirement, you have really leaned into supporting of local journalism. You're, among other things, you're on the board of the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting. What does that organization do?
So we are like, the best way to describe what we do is think of us like a ProPublica for the state of Maine. We do a lot of investigative long form reporting that does not get done by, typical local news outlets. And then we share it freely with all of the news outlets in Maine. So, we've done varied stories about things like climate and local government accountability, healthcare, education. What I would call the big tentpole stories that you don't always see in a local newspaper or on a television station or radio station.
So that's very interesting to me, and I don't know if we would call this a trend, but it seems that there's a notion or idea that journalism is becoming a nonprofit instead of a for-profit
Yeah.
business. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that journalism in the last couple of years has really benefited from a growth in the nonprofit sector. The challenge is going to be going forward, who's going to fund it? Who's going to support it? So some of the big, journalism foundations like the Knight Foundation and the Emerson Collective, the MacArthur Foundation, just to name a few, have been really generous in supporting local journalism, but they're also asking that these local endeavors become self-sustaining. So, that's a tall order when you don't necessarily take advertising and you're not trying to generate revenue in the traditional means. So a lot of these nonprofits are obviously looking for subscriptions. They're looking for donations from individuals. Certainly the Maine Monitor is a free publication. It has no paywall. So everything we do is to try to raise money by small dollar donations and also looking for grants and things like that. But there's a lot of that going on right now all across the country. And I think it's good. It has its challenges. Like I said, raising money is one of them, but it also tends to free up some of these organizations from the corporate tendency to want to put a thumb on what you might be covering.
Right. It fosters independence. I certainly believe that. But
Yes.
also, I mean, journalism, newspaper businesses were extremely profitable, and TV stations were extremely profitable. So why has that changed? Just the advertising market?
Oh no, it's a whole it's a whole slew of things, as you well know. I mean, the model for just to talk about TV, which you and I both know very well, the model for television stations has really been upended in the last couple of years, partly because the rating system, which we all depended on, the Nielsen rating systems, has not been measuring television very well, in my opinion, and as a result, the ratings have gone way down. The disaggregation of viewership has contributed, obviously streaming and all of that. And so as a result, there isn't as much money to get from advertising. Then you have, at least with network affiliated stations, there's been this upending of the business because the networks have started to demand more and more money from their affiliates, which, crimps their revenue. And so television stations, which had always been extremely profitable, in the 40, 50, even 60% margin range, have now been dropping back to ranges that resemble more what newspapers used to do many years ago. And in the meantime, newspapers have been dying off, as we all know. And we've created all these news deserts around the country. And so it's just like become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So out of all those ashes has come this nonprofit, scrappy, hyper local, kind of coverage, which has said, I'm not going to boil the ocean here. I'm just going to try to cover what's going on in my little neck of the woods. And then lo and behold, they discover things, or they hold government to account, or whatever they might be doing to cover wrongdoing and what have you. and they become bigger. So, and a lot of that is resulting in collaboration between lots of different, news organizations, both for profit and nonprofit.
So you have a column for TV News Check called "Raising the Bar."
Yep.
Brilliant title, love it. And in your most recent article, you really called out all journalism organizations to work together, and you were pretty honest and blunt about it. That there's a notion that TV news is shallow and obsessed with crime, and we both can agree that that's not entirely wrong.
Right.
And and TV people think print people are stuffy and elitist, but you say you got to get over it.
Yeah, I think we're way past the point of trying to be competitive with one another. And we have reached a point where if we're going to tell these important stories, then we need to lift each other up. A rising tide lifts all boats. And I think, I'm sure you found this during your career as a news director and as a producer. Um, there is a tendency on the part of people who work in news to be distrustful, right? I think that's the nature of who goes into journalism, right? I trust but verify. Um, but we also were extremely competitive. And I can remember when I was running a TV station in Chicago, 15 years ago, um, the Chicago Tribune and WLS TV, I mean, we rarely collaborated on anything. We occasionally went on a FOIA request together, and that was about it. But, it was rare that we got together and actually worked on a story together.
Well, WGN, who was owned by the Tribune, didn't do much collaboration either.
That's the irony of the whole thing. We probably collaborated more with the Tribune than WGN did. And it's kind of remarkable when you think about it, because we both had areas of expertise that we could have benefited from if we had thought about it. But, in those days, you had a culture that existed in the TV newsroom that was like, we're there first, we're louder, we're bigger, we're stronger, we have more viewers. And the newspapers are stuffy and boring and they take too long. And the newspapers were looking at us as all you cover is crime and weather and more weather, et cetera, et cetera. And, so I think what I've come to realize now retired a few years and watching the news environment in Maine is that particularly when you live in areas of the country where you don't have big cities and you have a lot of small towns, collaboration is absolutely critical. You can't have every little small town in Maine or any other state where you don't have big cities. You can't have them all attempting to try to watch what's going on. Meanwhile, if you don't have collaboration, maybe the school board in a particular town has a vote under cover of darkness and no light that says we're not going to fund that anymore. And all of a sudden parents are saying, wait a second, what do you mean my child who has a particular disability or whatever can no longer get the services they require? And it's done. The decision's made. There's no one to go to at that point. So it's really important that news organizations do get together and help each other. And I've seen a lot of that going on in Maine, so I'm really encouraged by it.
I mean, that is great. I want to talk a little more. I live in Palm Springs, California now, and there's a little not startup. It's like 2-person operation, the Palm Springs Post, and I think they're the only ones who cover the city council. So it's important, you're right, that just to keep that somebody needs to be there reporting, and hopefully it gets picked up. And I also joined the board of the Coachella Valley Journalism Foundation just this week, and that's our notion is to get them to work together more. The organization actually started by funding the opinion editor for the Desert Sun, which Gannett had eliminated.
Right.
So that's how the organization even started.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's look, a lot of the big foundations, whether it's Knight or MacArthur or whoever, they're actually specifically asking in these grant requests, what are you doing to collaborate? Who are you collaborating with? And right now, of course, we know what's happened to public media, right? The loss of funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And so everybody's focused on that right now, which is important. And I support public media. I'm a donor to public media. I believe in it. But they too have to collaborate, right? It can't just be give them all the money, right? They need to work closely with the other, whoever those organizations are. Over my 43-year career, I've had a few instances where I've been able to work, with another outlet, whether it's a newspaper or or public TV or whatever. And each time we did it, it was hard, and it was, the getting the news directors together and having them actually trust each other was difficult. But the resulting work was really good. So I think it's possible, but it's a cultural shift.
Yes, when I was at KTLA, in the beginning of my career at KTLA, we were owned by the Tribune Company, which also owned the Los Angeles Times. And it was funny, in the early days, I would go to these meetings, and it would be me and maybe one person from the TV station. And it would be a room full of these people. And we always had to go downtown to the Times, which
Right.
was fine. But I feel like they just would like run out the clock. They would just talk until the meeting was over and then go away. But we actually were able to get a couple of people interested in working with us, and we did some consumer stuff together, and we because there was a guy who wanted to be on TV. So that you got to find those people and those success stories, and then kind of kind of goes from there. In sports, we actually were able to collaborate with the sports guys more so
Well,
than any.
and it's funny because recently, well, maybe less than a year ago, I had a bunch of I had the staff of the Maine Monitor, which is like 9 people. I had them over to my house, and we did a little session on how to create videos for social media. Now, I found it very amusing that I'm hosting the session, like I know something about this. I really know about this much, but I was struck by the fact that these young print reporters, I call them print, they're not print, they're digital. These young digital reporters, most of whom are in the under 30 range, actually didn't have much knowledge of how to actually produce a video. I mean, to me, they're digital natives. Of course, they know how to produce a video. But they went to journalism school, and they focused on writing, which is great. They're great writers, and they focused on doing research, which is important. But we explained to them, look, if you want people to find your story, you got to go where the people are. So if that means creating a little short Instagram video or something, just you can still put the link to your story, and they'll still read it, but
Mhm.
they can't find it unless you tell them about it.
What are you at the Maine Monitor? Which is the Maine Monitor is the publication of the
Yes,
Maine
of the
Center for
main
Public
center.
Affairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how are you guys collaborating with other organizations?
So we have all kinds of partnerships. We work with ProPublica. We work with Report for America. We have a joint Report for America reporter who works with the Maine Monitor and the Bangor Daily News, which is actually a for-profit newspaper. We provide all of our stories for free with no paywall to other news organizations in the state. So Maine Public Media, which runs both radio and TV in Maine, takes our stuff all the time. The Portland Press Herald, which is a newspaper. The Tegna station, Channel 6, has a regular session with the Maine Monitor reporters to talk about what they're working on each week, which I think is fantastic. And there's other things like that going on, collaborating with smaller, really hyper local newspapers, making sure they have access to what we provide. And then also, they sometimes are writing a story that even for us even would be too narrowly focused, right? Because we tend to focus on the sort of bigger impact of things across the state. And we're not a daily, so we're not trying to take daily readership or viewership away from anybody. We essentially publish a digest every day, but then we publish our original stories on Sundays. We have a
Uh,
bunch of newsletters that focus on things like health and climate, and then certain regions of the state. But yeah, we're doing a lot of collaboration, and we work with the AP. We work with, as I said, Report for America, ProPublica, and then the local organizations.
so in your column, you called out, or you used an example of the Nexstar collaboration in Pennsylvania with Spotlight PA. So tell me a little more about how that works.
I think the idea was that the general manager and forgive me because I can't remember what city it was, Scranton, I think, or
Yeah, probably
yeah,
Scranton. It's
Scranton,
a big station.
um,
Yeah.
went to the Spotlight folks and said, I think there's an opportunity here. How could we work together? And, what he realized is the news people he had in his little station in Scranton could not do the kind of big investigative tentpole stories that they were doing. And conversely, Spotlight was not getting the coverage or getting the awareness, right? Because they're a digital outlet. So it was, well, how can we help you? Well, Spotlight went out and got some money, grant, because they're a nonprofit. The money goes to them. It does not go to Nexstar. So Nexstar is not taking any, because somebody commented on when I wrote my story that they don't want to give money to Nexstar. I said, well, they're not getting any money. they get their advertising. This guy realized if I can get better, high quality, more impactful stories on our news, that's going to ultimately turn into more viewership, which
Mhm.
means more advertising, means more revenue. So it's a little indirect in that way. But he can't afford to bring those kinds of reporters onto his news staff. So he said, well, these people over here at Spotlight are already doing this. Why can't we find a way to work together? It will remain to be seen, how well it works, but so far it appears to be working very well. And to your point earlier, the person or the individual they used from Spotlight on one of their stories, I think likes being on TV. I think probably he gets a little joy out of that. So he gets to come on and amplify the work he's doing and get it in front of all of the Nexstar stations across Pennsylvania, which is pretty powerful.
That is pretty powerful. And investigative journalism, as we both know, is an expensive endeavor. You've got
Yep.
people who are on TV 3 or 4 times a year, and you're paying them. Oftentimes, you're paying them more than you are like
Right.
general assignment reporters.
Right.
So it is a challenge to do that. But also, I feel like we need to push back a little bit on the next stars of the world too, because they're making a lot of money.
Yep.
So why can't they, participate in this somehow too financially?
Right. Well, when you say that, do you mean why can't they get some of the money that's being earmarked
No,
for
no.
this?
Why can't they like support
Provide some of the
the
money.
yeah, provide some of the money for the nonprofits or be involved in somehow.
Yeah. So that's a very complicated, how well do you know Perry Sook question. Um, um, look, their job is to support their shareholders and to generate as much money as possible. I'm not defending that. I'm just saying that's what
Right.
they would tell you. I think this particular general manager was clever in that he
Mhm.
said, "How can I make my station more impactful? How can I make the station seem more important to the community? Oh, I see these guys over here doing this. I'm going to include them in." I would tell you that if it were me and I was running a company like that, I would try to find a way to get money to these people to do more work, do more of the work. But I have a different point of view on how you fund this stuff than some of the brethren that I worked with when I was running Graham.
We need more people like you, though. Why
Uh,
and you say it's not charity; it is smart business and
right,
good journalism, and
right.
I think you're right, and the payoff is good for both sides of the thing. But I just how do you get people to do this, and how do you get them to do this more, and then how do you get the funding too? I mean, that's the biggest challenge because this little organization I'm involved with, I mean, we have a budget of right now it's like $200,000. So
Right.
we're, growing that and just, how do you see the future evolving in that world?
Well, one of the things I think we all need to do is culturally, we need to make sure people understand, and this is both individuals and then the business leaders and the community leaders. We need to make them understand that when you don't have a strong local, free, independent press, you have a problem protecting democracy. And it sounds very noble to say that, but it's really true, right? Because there've been, I mean, Northwestern Medill just came out with a study just, I think, a few days ago, reaffirming a point that I think we've all known intuitively, which is when you don't have coverage, bad things happen. I mean, I'm really paraphrasing, but governments are not held to account. The people who work for you, the people you elect, are not necessarily doing what you ask them to do, and it's all being done in a kind of, there's a little bit of subterfuge and a little bit of darkness, and you need a reporter to walk in and ask questions.
Mhm.
So, to the extent that we can culturally get people to understand that having journalism, local journalism in particular, having it is going to improve your culture, your lot in life, your society. It's going to ensure that your taxes don't go up too much because if if no one's paying attention to what's going on at that city council meeting, then the people sitting on the city council can say, "Well, we don't have enough money to pay for this, so let's just raise taxes," and no one's going to know about it because who's going to cover that? Who's going to let people know? I mean, the 5 people who go to the city council meeting will know, but if they don't amplify it, then people won't know.
One of
And
those
so,
five needs to be a reporter.
yeah, absolutely. And I
I mean,
think we need I believe if we could start to shift the conversation around local journalism, away from this silly concept of enemy of the people and all this baloney. Local journalism, where people live in the community and cover the community in which they live, that journalism is really, really important, just like it's important to have a hospital, just like it's important to have a school. It is part of the fabric of the community. And if you don't have that, then you're missing a limb, and then you're going to have problems. The other thing is that we're being kind of waterboarded, if you will, by social media. And so a lot of dreck is being put out there, right? A lot of stuff that you read it and you go, oh my God, and then you share it. And then you realize 2 minutes later it's not true because somebody made it up. But by that point, the damage is done. And one thing I think about local journalism, when you separate it away from national, is that there's a lot more faith that people have in local journalism because they know the reporters and they know the editors and they understand who these people are because they live there. So, to the extent that we can build back up that ecosystem and help sustain it in however we do it, and I just think people need to understand that. If you go back and look at the history of newspapers, they weren't started to provide people with information. They were started to sell. The news was just the stuff around the ads.
Advertising.
Yeah. It's like, let's run a few ads and then, I guess we could throw a story in or something so people will buy it. But, the original newspapers were all very hyper partisan, right? Much like if you go to Substack today or whatever, you can live in a totally hyper partisan world on a national level. It's harder to live in that hyper partisan world when you're local.
What do you think the trend is? Is it newsletters as well?
I think newsletters have become very convenient. Certainly for someone in my generation, I like a newsletter because it gets dumped into my inbox. I can read it or not based on maybe the headline or whatever, just like you would a newspaper, right? But I can read it and decide, yes, that's something that I'm interested in. My kids who are in their mid-20s, they love a podcast. They love a good podcast. They listen to them all the time. And they often send me podcasts that they listen to, and they tell me you should listen to this one. And they're very well regarded and well written podcasts, but they like to hear it as opposed to read it. And I mean, they both read, but that's their primary way of receiving something. And then, I think unfortunately, given the way media has dispersed, we have to produce something. Essentially, we have to produce it across many different media. So you have to be on YouTube, you have to be on Substack, you have to be local, you have to be in your inbox, right? You have to be video, you have to be audio, you have to be in print, etc.
I agree with that. The idea is having this, whatever the content is, and then repurposing it or reorganizing it for whatever medium. I even do that with this. I've written a couple of print articles based off of podcast episodes that I've had and pitched them to other organizations in town or elsewhere. And I think that's really the best way of getting your stories out there.
No question. And if you're someone who prefers to listen or watch, then you just want to be able to do that. You don't want to have to hunt and peck for that. I have one Substack that I like a lot. And I always notice at the bottom of it, it always says, if you prefer to listen to this, click here. If you prefer to watch it, click here. If you prefer to read it, click here. It's so easy to do it any way you want. And sometimes if I'm in the kitchen and I'm cooking dinner or whatever, then I just put it on play for audio because I don't have to try to read it while I'm doing something else.
That's fascinating. That is interesting. The new world that we live in, and then focusing on the hyper local. What are your go-to newsletters and sources these days?
Oh my gosh, I have my phone is pretty much full up these days with so many things. I follow the local papers here, so I have everything from you'll love this one, the Cape Elizabeth Courier, which is a free newspaper to the approximately 15,000 people who live in my town of Cape Elizabeth. Comes out about, I don't know, every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe. I think it's got a weird schedule, but it's a very important paper because it's the only one that really covers what's going on in Cape Elizabeth, right? Portland Press Herald, the Bangor Daily News, which is a very good newspaper. And so even though I don't live in Bangor, they cover the northern part of Maine. So I do subscribe. I'm a big believer, by the way, in subscribing. So
Uh-huh.
I put my money where my mouth is and I pay for my subscriptions. I do not try to get everything for free. I don't pay for like 100 things, but I do pay for a lot of things. And I also still read the New York Times and the Washington Post. I read The Guardian, which I think is a very good online outlet. I've become a little bit maybe overloaded with Substack, but I do follow a bunch of people. One of my favorite people to follow, of course, is Heather Cox Richardson, who I think is brilliant. And, I don't quite know how she does it because she has a staff now that helps her, but she publishes 6 days a week. And
Uh,
she writes, do you know who she is? She writes through the
uh,
lens of history. Oh, you would love her. She writes a Substack called Letters from an American. It was started years ago. She is a history professor at Boston College and has written a number of books she's a U.S. history expert. So she tends to write about what's going on today through the lens of history. So you feel a little calmer because you hear about something happening nationally, and then she goes, in 1863, this happened, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And you think you know your U.S. history, but she really knows it.
so one last question is kind of off topic, but I think you'll have an interesting perspective. WPLG, which was one of the Graham stations for many years, and
Yes,
was one of your TV stations that you manage. They recently said goodbye to their ABC affiliation.
they did.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's going to be it's going to be a challenge, but I think they are in well positioned to make this happen. It would appear from everything I know, and I know Bert Medina, who runs the station very well, and he's a very good friend. I think they did not go into this lightly. They tried everything they could to negotiate what they felt would be a fair deal with ABC, and when they couldn't get where they wanted to be, and they were at an impasse for quite a long time, they sort of looked to WJXT in Jacksonville, which is the original station to walk away from a network way back when, well before my time at Graham. WJXT is still a powerhouse television station in Jacksonville, Florida, still commands the bulk of the market, which is amazing. And I think PLG has a very good shot of doing the same thing because Berkshire, their owner, has given them a wide berth to do what they need to do. And they're not going into this, naively. They know that the first few years are probably going to be very difficult for them financially because they're going to amp up the amount of news coverage they're doing, and they're going to lose a tremendous amount of money in both advertising potentially, but also in retransmission consent money. Because the retrans business is really messed up. It's just it's really, really messed up. And the cable and satellite companies are also bleeding viewers, right? So they're doing everything they can to try to hold on, and they don't. From their point of view, I get it. They don't want to pay more money to stations if they don't have to. But the networks have kind of put the screws to them through the affiliates. When you're not affiliated, the retrans people will say, I'll carry you, but I'm not paying you any money. And it's
That's the challenge.
very
It's way more
difficult.
complicated than people think it is.
It's way more complicated. And you can sometimes scrape just a tiny bit of money away from them if you can get them to feel badly enough about it, but most of the time they don't. So they're going to lose that potential, although today it matters less because cable and satellite is at an all-time low, in terms of subscribers. But I do think that PLG, it's a very strong station in Miami, and I think they understand the market very well. And you can't underestimate how important that is because understanding that market is the key to how you cover it. And if you cover it properly, back to our point about hyperlocal, the people live there and they understand what they're covering. You're going to break some big stories. And once you do that, if you do that consistently, then people locally are going to take notice.
That's true. And I spoke with Bill Bahovey, who was my news director when I worked there
Great
25
guy.
years ago.
Love Bill.
Great guy.
Yeah.
Knows the market, been there for, I think he's probably the longest running news director in the country at this point.
He probably is because I know he's been there forever. Yeah.
I was there from 96 to 2001 and he was my news director then. So it's been,
Wow. Wow. I didn't realize it went back that far.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
But I mean, he knows. The only thing I worry about, I know, like when I was at KGLA, we were doing 90 plus hours of news a week. But
Right.
we didn't do it overnight. we grew from 30 to 90 over a decade. So,
Right.
it was adding another newscast here and adding another newscast there over time. I do worry about just the strain on the growing pains, because it's even when you added a couple of hours of news a day, you had growing pains from it. So I can imagine their growing pains are tremendous. But
Right.
in a year or two from now, it'll be fine. It's just getting through that
You
initial.
know, you know, I when I was at ABC years ago, I helped birth something called the Live Well Network, which was a digital network, and it had a good run for about 10 years, and then it died. But when we first birthed that, I remember this so well. I remember saying to somebody, "It doesn't really matter what the first set of shows are, because in 2 years, none of them will exist. We will have to evolve." And I think for Bill and Bert and everyone at PLG, there will be some mistakes, and that's okay. They can just fail forward on that, and they
Uh-huh.
can replace the things that don't work or replace the individuals that aren't resonating, and they'll get their footing because they do understand how to cover local news. But you're right; it's hard to go from whatever 30 or 40 hours up to 90. That's a lot, and you will be repetitive, and you will
Uh-huh.
potentially run the risk of boring people. So you're going to have to find a way to pepper in through all those hours of news some coverage that's going to make people want to watch.
And that daytime is, I mean, let's be honest, it's a lot of it's companion TV anyway. It's
That's
just,
what it is.
yeah.
Yes.
So you just need some interesting people, and just don't do the same story every hour. Thank you for the insight and for the work that you're doing and really doubling down on supporting of local journalism. I feel like that's my new mission too, since I'm living out in Palm Springs and understanding a kind of a smaller market as well.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled for you that you found life after TV news, which is great. And it is pretty nice, isn't it?
Yes, you get to do what you want on your terms.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you so much. I really
Thank you, guys.
appreciate
We'll
the
have to
time.
have you back again, but talking about
Absolutely,
your next topic.
it sounds great.
A big thank you to Emily for her perspective and her commitment to the business and the future of the business. Her column is called Raising the Bar at tvnewscheck.com. Hope you learned something today. If you did, leave us a good review. Back to regular programming on Tuesday. See you then.